The best option for the Jets with the second pick in the draft might just be a player nobody is talking about right now, but we'll talk about him today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, January 21st, 2026, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. On today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Today, we'll talk about the Jets offseason. We'll talk about whether they should prioritize offense or defense more. We'll talk about what the Jets should do with the 16th overall pick. Easy to forget, the Jets have a second first-round pick this year. They got it from the Colts in the Sauce Gardner trade. But we'll begin by talking about the first-round pick that's higher, the second overall pick. We begin our first question. John, I've heard a lot of prospects' names thrown around for the Jets as potential picks at number 2 overall. What about David Bailey out of Texas Tech? He looked great this season. I've begun doing my deep dive. The way I handle the season is I focus on the Jets, and I usually watch college football for enjoyment. Now, of course, when I'm watching college football during the season, I'll notice a standout performance. I'll notice a guy who looks really good. But I usually wait till the end of the season to really start analyzing draft prospects. And I kind of have had to dive into this really heavier than I thought I would, because up until Dante Moore last week announced he was going back to Oregon, it seemed like the debate that would define the Jets offseason would be drafting Dante Moore versus trading down. Well, now Dante Moore is not going to be picked. So Jets need to figure out what they're going to do with the second pick. I think it's going to be very difficult to trade this pick. There's always a possibility, maybe some team falls in love with a prospect somewhere along the way. But very likely the Jets are going to be making this pick at 2 overall. And there are lots of prospects whose names have been thrown around, and lots of prospects who likely will emerge. Rueben Bain out of Miami. He's a defensive end. He's a guy who looks like a really solid prospect. One of the things I've tried to do when I analyze a prospect, particularly at number 2 overall, I try and figure out the case against picking him. Now, Bain is a guy who I think has what you would call a high floor. I don't like using that expression because, in theory, anybody's ceiling is the best player in the NFL. Anybody's floor is, not good at all. I've heard lots of can't miss prospects miss. I've heard lots of guys who allegedly didn't have a high ceiling turn out to be great. But I think if you look at Bain's game right now, the odds are really good that he's at least going to be a good player. And there's value to that. It's not a guarantee you get a good player at 2 overall. Having a high floor like Bain, a guy who, has the size to hold up at the edge spot, a guy who has the ability to slide inside. If there's a weak guard you're facing and you're on a passing down, you can slide Bain inside without a problem. You can even slide him inside on early downs against a weak guard. He's got the size to hold up. There are questions, though, about what the odds are he will have of being an elite pass rusher. There's some concerns about his length, and I think the measurements at the combine in a couple of weeks will be really important for him. I'm not totally convinced that the odds are high he's going to be an all-pro level player. You could talk about some of the other guys. The name that I think only I will mention, Francis Mauigoa, who is a tackle out of Miami, guy who's a real mauler. A lot of people, I think I might be the only one who's not against potentially taking him, just plugging him at guard and having an elite offensive line. And for the Jets, I don't view that as taking a guard. I view it as getting yourself one elite unit on your team that you can build out from. I think that's the one player the Jets could take that would actually create an elite level unit on this team, and it would be at an important position like the offensive line. I don't think anybody else agrees with me, though, and I don't think the Jets are going to go in that direction. So, you could talk about Carnell Tate, the wide receiver out of Ohio State. I like his game. Do I like him at 2 overall? Do I think he's, again, another guy who, is he going to be an elite level player? Are the odds high? I'm not so sure about that. I would not be surprised if Ty Simpson, the quarterback out of Alabama, suddenly enters the equation. Not that I think the Jets should take Ty Simpson 2 overall. Not that I think any team should take Ty Simpson in the top 10, but there's always a supply and demand issue at the quarterback position. And there's always a desperate team somewhere along the way that takes a quarterback too high. It's true in almost every NFL draft. Could that happen with Ty Simpson this year? I think in the absence of other good quarterback prospects, perhaps. But I go to David Bailey out of Texas Tech, and I try and figure out what's the case against this guy too. And I've really been having a tough time figuring it out. He looks like a great prospect to me. Now, the one caveat here is I don't think he's as complete of a player entering the NFL as Rueben Bain is. Bailey's on the smaller side. It's not clear that he's going to hold up as well against the run. But you look at his pass rushing skill. I mean, it's really, really good. He was a dominant player this year on an excellent Texas Tech defense. That Texas Tech defense was one of the best, maybe the best defense in college football. They lost the Orange Bowl, which was the quarterfinal game of the college football playoff, but it wasn't because of the defense. It was because they couldn't do anything against Oregon's offense. In fact, in many ways, they had the better of the play on the defensive side of the ball. They gave Dante Moore a lot of problems. And as you know, Dante Moore is a pretty highly thought of prospect. And Bailey, may have been the best player in that game. I look at some of the underlying things when you talk about a prospect. One of them is, did they break out their last season? And the reason that that's important to figure out is it's one thing to break out when you're the same age as other guys. If you break out in your last season, sometimes that's a sign that you're just more physically mature than the guys you're facing. You've got more experience. It's not necessarily a sign you're a great prospect. The answer to that is yes. Bailey had his best season his final year, but if you go back earlier in his career when he was at Stanford, maybe the sack numbers weren't there. Now you look at the sack numbers; it looks like a big discrepancy. He got pressure at a really high rate early in his career. So even though he was a younger guy, he was playing major conference football, and he was playing at a pretty high level there. Another aspect of his game that kind of intrigues me is I don't think he has like a super advanced arsenal of pass rush moves. And that sounds like a criticism at first because you say, well, you'd like a guy who's a little bit better developed. But there's another way I look at it. This guy dominated major college football, and he still is kind of learning how to play the game. And I know it's dangerous to say that, a guy, he'll develop once he gets into the NFL, because it doesn't always work out that way. But what I would say is I think that in terms of player development, the low-hanging fruit for coaches, for the most part, is teaching a talented pass rusher how to develop moves. So I think that it's almost a positive that his moves aren't super. I mean, it's not like he has no pass rushing moves, but there are some technical things he's got to learn. Even so, even as he's learning to play, he looks like the best player on the field. He's so athletic that he can just dominate games. He can take games over. So, if the objective at the number 2 overall pick is to get a guy who's just a game changer, a guy who will wreck the other team's offense, a guy who leaves offensive coordinators up at night, all the cliches, David Bailey out of Texas Tech might be the guy who has the best chance of doing that. Now, again, anybody who's drafted high conceivably could do it. I've heard a lot of guys' elite potential written off before. But I look at Bailey. I mean, I think that the odds are very high he's at least going to be a good pass rusher. Now, I think his floor is as a pass rusher, because I think no matter what, you never can account for injuries. You can't predict. There's certain things you can't predict, but you can go in with some degree of confidence that he's going to be a really good pass rusher in the NFL, and he has the chance to be special. Bain, you enter his NFL career with confidence that he's going to be a good all-around player. He's going to be able to do both. He's going to be able to play the run and get after the quarterback. He looked great in the national championship game against Indiana. In fact, if you want the case that Rueben Bain's going to break out, I mean, look at what he did in that game against an Indiana line that's pretty good. He was a dominant force. But I look at Bailey this year, and he was off the charts good for Texas Tech. So I think that he very well could be the number 2 overall pick. This could be a situation where, maybe he starts out a little lower. I'm not seeing a ton of projections. I'm not in the mock drafts that are coming out right now. I'm not seeing a lot of people projecting him to the Jets at 2. But I think the deeper we get into this process, it would not shock me at all if he started rising up the boards and became a legitimate consideration for the Jets with that pick. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about the other first-round pick the Jets have. That's right. The Jets have a second first-round pick. It's at 16. Most of the attention's on 2. But there are some good prospects available at 16, including a wide receiver who's being doubted for all the wrong reasons. We'll discuss as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Kicking off the year feeling good is the goal, right? And honestly, hydration is the easiest win. When I stay on top of it, my energy, focus, and mood all level up. But let's be real, plain water does not always cut it, especially when you're grinding through long days, hitting the gym, or just trying to stay consistent with your health goals. That's where Drip Drop comes in. Doctor developed, proven fast hydration that helps your body and mind work better. Think clearer focus, better energy, elevated mood, even that fresh skin glow. Drip Drop's science-backed formula is trusted by firefighters, medical professionals, and over 90% of top college and pro teams because it hydrates you faster and more effectively than water alone. And they have flexible subscription options, so you're never stuck without it, whether you're hitting the gym, juggling work, or just staying consistent with your goals. And right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house, it's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action, so when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It includes access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Jets compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app, along with an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat for listeners of this show. Go to LockedOnNYJets.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. And today on Locked On Jets, we are doing our weekly mailbag show. Let's continue now. Our next question. John, with all the talk with what the Jets will do with the second overall pick, what do you think they should do at pick 16? Well, a lot of it depends on what happens in the early stages of the draft. I think there are going to be lots of prospects available. We're still early in the process. The college football season just ended Monday night. So now we head to the Senior Bowl. We'll have the combine after that. We'll have pro days. We'll have in-person visits. So a lot will change between now and then. And I'm sure there are lots of prospects who will end up on our radar. But I'll tell you one who really intrigues me. That's Makai Lemon, a wide receiver out of USC. And it's entirely possible he rises as the process continues. It's entirely possible he's out of the Jets' reach at pick 16. But generally speaking right now, it seems like his stock puts him right around the mid-teens. He was likely to go off the board right around where the Jets pick. And I just really like his game. There are lots of different ways to be a good receiver in the NFL, but I think the guys who are easiest to project are the guys like Lemon, the guys who have nuance to their game, the guys who have sophistication to their game, the guys who know how to run routes, the guys who know how to set corners up. The criticism of Lemon is that he's not physically imposing. And whenever I hear about something like that, I think, well, lots of different styles of wide receiver in the NFL. And I like the crafty guys. I like the guys who know how to run routes. I like the guys who, know how to shake a defensive back by using their smarts. It's one thing to have blazing speed. That's great. It's a huge asset if you got it. But, just having speed alone doesn't make you a good receiver. And I think a guy like Lemon's easier to project than other guys to have success. I think in a lot of ways, what you're doing in the NFL draft is you're trying to eliminate risk as best as possible, and that doesn't mean that doesn't mean you avoid anybody with elite tools. But I think back 4 years to 2022, one of the reasons I really like Garrett Wilson was that the odds of him being a zero were pretty low because you saw him at Ohio State. He knew how to get open. And by the way, this is a good argument for Rueben Bain, as we discussed a little bit earlier. I didn't know if Garrett Wilson was going to be a 1,500-yard receiver. I didn't know if he was going to be a 1,000-yard receiver. I didn't know if he was going to be an 800-yard receiver, but I knew he was going to be a good player. I knew he was going to be a good starter. And I'm not saying he's going to have the same career trajectory, but a lot of the criticisms of Makai Lemon are similar to the criticisms Jaxon Smith-Njigba faced 3 years ago. Seattle Seahawks, of course, drafted him in the first round. Much to many of our chagrins, the Jets passed on him despite having a big need at the wide receiver position. and instead selected Will McDonald out of Iowa State. And Smith-Njigba has become one of the best receivers in the league. I think there are concerns that Lemon will only be able to play in the slot in the NFL, that maybe he doesn't have the tools to succeed on the outside. And to that, I say, well, so what? The NFL is now a league where 3 wide receivers are on the field the whole time. And we've seen guys who spend most of their time in the slot be great. I mean, you go back 4 or 5 years, Cooper Kupp had a historically great season, primarily playing from the slot. The slot is not what it was 30 years ago, where it was a part-time player who was, had to be small and quick and crafty, and he was a guy you only threw to on maybe 3rd and 5. Those days are over. Your slot receiver is a full-time player now. And I always think about the famous scene in the movie Moneyball when the Oakland A's are trying to figure out what players they get. And, all the old school scouts are talking about, this guy doesn't look the part. This guy looks the part. And Billy Beane, the general manager, asked the front, all those scouts, does this guy get on base? And for some of them, the answer is no. And they're like, oh, we'll train him. Billy Beane's like, oh, what do you mean we're going to train him? More or less. I mean, I'm not quoting it directly. But, the big question Billy Beane kept asking is, does he get on base? Well, when it comes to wide receiver play in the NFL, the question I always ask is, does the guy know how to get open? Because you can be the fastest guy in the league. You can be the tallest guy in the league. Perfect example of that for the Jets was the guy they drafted in the second round in 2012, the guy they traded up for, Stephen Hill, who had 4.3 speed and was 6'4", and had 0 of the attributes you needed to play the wide receiver position. Could not run routes, could not get off press coverage, could not get open, despite the time speed, could not get open down the field, could not high point the ball. For whatever reason, whenever the ball was thrown to him, he'd jump. He always threw the timing off a throw and left himself open to take a big hit and be dislodged from the ball. It's great if you've got a guy who has all the nuanced stuff, who knows all the stuff about how to play wide receiver and has the physical tools. But when a guy does it at the level Makai Lemon does, I have no problem taking him in the middle of the first round. I think he's going to be a really good receiver, and the Jets certainly need to add at the wide receiver group. In case we've forgotten, the Jets did not have a 400-yard receiver this year. I'm kind of struck by the extent to which people say, the Jets have a lot of talent at the skill positions. They've got Garrett Wilson. When we say that the Jets did not have a 400-yard receiver this year, of course, if Garrett Wilson was healthy, he would have surpassed that by a mile. He may have challenged for 1,000 yards again. But after that, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the Jets have nothing. Jets need help at the wide receiver position. I think that you definitely look at, I think Lemon would be a guy who really interests me. I'm sure we'll talk about some other guys, though, as we get closer to the draft. Next question. Hey, John B. I think everyone by now who watches or listens to football has heard about Ravens owner Steve Bisciotti. What are your thoughts on him? Do you wish we had an owner like him instead of Woody? If not, is there another owner for a different team that you wish our owner was more like? I mean, I wish our owner was more like almost every other owner in the NFL. Bisciotti seems like a pretty good owner. I mean, the Ravens have been one of the most stable franchises in the league since he bought them a little over 2 decades ago. Now he inherited Ozzie Newsome, who's a great general manager, which certainly helps things. They had a seamless transition to Eric DaCosta. Bisciotti was the guy in 2007 who made the decision to move on from a Super Bowl winning coach in Brian Billick, and he brought in John Harbaugh, and Harbaugh was kind of an off-the-radar choice at that point. What's amazing is how many of the best coaches in the NFL raised eyebrows when they were immediately hired. I mean, if you go back to 1999, that's what happened with Andy Reid when the Eagles hired him because he had never been a coordinator before. Sean McVay, when the Rams hired him, he was just turned 30. People wondered whether he was too young. There's a lesson to be learned in this, that the conventional wisdom at head coach is not always the correct call. So I think he made an outside the box hire with Harbaugh. The Ravens have consistently been good under his ownership. He's had a few hiccups. He's had a few really weird moments, but for the most part, it seems like a pretty good owner. I think one of the things that makes Woody Johnson stand out, though, is there are very few genuinely good owners in this league. I mean, most of the owners in this league cause problems for their teams. And I think that's what makes Woody stand out, is that the bar is not high to be a decent owner in this league. And yet he manages to be the worst owner, which takes some doing, because the competition for worst owner is really fierce. At any given point, there might be a time where an owner is as bad as Woody Johnson, but those owners eventually get better. Most owners go up and down. Woody, it's just all down. I look across the league. I mean, there are very few owners I wouldn't trade Woody Johnson for. Some of the elite owners, Jeffrey Lurie in Philadelphia. I mean, the Eagles have always been top-notch franchise since he's been there. They've always been on the cutting edge. He's really a good owner. They make, for the most part, they make good hires. The Steelers ownership's been really good under the Rooneys. Those are the types of owners you aspire to have. But it's not that hard to be better. It's not that hard for Woody to be less damaging. I mean, and there aren't that many great owners. I just wish Woody would be a little less damaging. I would certainly trade Woody for Biscotti, though. I do think Biscotti's, for everything I can tell, is a pretty decent owner. Now we'll see how he handles the post John Harbaugh era, because he's got a very important job in front of him. He made a controversial decision to move on from a guy who had been very successful in Baltimore. He'd done it once before, fired Brian Billick after the 2007 season. Now we'll see what he does. We'll see if he makes the good hire replacing John Harbaugh. The thing about being a good owner is that sometimes you're at the top of the world, and one bad decision can send you tumbling down. So we'll see what happens. But to answer the question, yes, I'd certainly take Steve Biscotti over Woody Johnson. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about what else the Jets need to do this offseason. We've talked about a couple of the draft picks that they've got, but the Jets have a lot of resources. Should they prioritize the offense? Should they prioritize the defense? I think the answer to that has changed since Dante Moore decided he was going back to school. I'll explain why that is as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bet you like most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boost you want to apply. The boost lets you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. The boosts give you more juice on the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet on something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make your picks, then apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but was not the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone for this show, I'd go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Sponsored Jobs boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of the show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question comes from Dan, who writes, "Hi, John. I've certainly thought the Jets should take an offensive-first approach to free agency and the draft. Basically, having a young quarterback, you need to make sure you fill as many offensive holes as you can to give that guy the best chance of succeeding. Now that we're not drafting a quarterback at second overall, though, it seems unlikely that that's going to be a consideration. Does it make sense for the Jets to spread the resources out across both the offense and defense this offseason and improve both units? Did the fact that we're not drafting a quarterback second overall change your answer?" Well, to answer the last part of that question, absolutely. I think that the strategy changes completely when you're not drafting a quarterback second overall. I would not be surprised to see the Jets draft a quarterback at some point, and I am a little worried that Ty Simpson's going to enter the discussion. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but let's say hypothetically the Jets are not drafting a quarterback second overall. I think that the imperative becomes less to load up on offense. And the reason for that is pretty obvious. And I think if you've watched the Jets over the last 2 decades, you understand it. It's really hard for a rookie quarterback in this league to succeed. You're really just trying to keep your head above water. You're trying to figure out how to play the position. You need help. It's very rare that a rookie quarterback comes in and knows exactly how to read a defense. knows exactly how to handle pressure, understands, all the different defensive concepts that they've never seen before. These things usually take time. So you need talent on offense to help simplify things for the quarterback. You need a number one receiver you can trust, where if the quarterback's not sure what to do, just throw the ball to your number one guy. Now, the Jets have that in Garrett Wilson, but they don't have much else on the offensive side of the ball. You want an offensive line that's not going to leave your quarterback under duress. The Jets have a good framework for their offensive line. I mean, they have 3 really good young offensive linemen, but I think there are 2 spots to figure out. Now, Josh Myers right now is penciled in as the starting center. I think that's not a bad insurance policy to have, but I certainly think the Jets would be well advised to continue looking for upgrades at the center position. And then the left guard spot's unclear what they're going to do there. John Simpson's going to be a free agent. He was the starting left guard. Elijah Vera Tucker, I mean, I don't know if the Jets are going to bring him back. He would be an option. You could re-sign him and move him back to left guard with Joe Tippmann playing at center. And then the rest of the skill spots are, up in the air. I mean, I don't think you'd want to trust Adonai Mitchell in a starting role. I'm a skeptic that John Mechie is any sort of answer at all at the wide receiver position. I really wanted to like Mechie, but he just did not do a whole lot good after those first 2 games. He had a good game against New England on Thursday night, had a good game against Baltimore the following Sunday. After that, was drop machine, really. The backfield, are they going to bring back Breece Hall? We don't know that. So this team right now is not really set up to support a young quarterback, but that could change with the resources if you threw a lot of them on offense. But now things have changed. Now if you're not going to have a rookie quarterback, you do have to look at the defense, because the defense is in really bad shape. I can't remember a Jets defense personnel-wise ever being this bad. I mean, I don't even know where you begin. Jawan Briggs arguably is the best player on this defense right now. And, look, Jawan Briggs was a nice success story. He was a really nice find. I mean, the trade that they made to get him from the Cleveland Browns was an excellent trade. You do that trade 100 times out of 100. And I got to say, I really did not understand it at the time they did it. But I now understand it. Jawan Briggs was a phenomenal find by Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji. But I don't know if you want him to be the best player on your defense. I mean, maybe it's Jamie Sherwood who's got to bounce back, but there aren't a lot of pieces on defense. And I mentioned this yesterday. I don't think you can, even if you drafted a quarterback, I think you could skew more towards the offense. You could prioritize the offense more, but I don't think you could completely disregard the defense, because you need to have good players on both sides of the ball to win games. And I think there also is a danger if you say the defense doesn't matter, you're not putting the quarterback in a great position, because statistically interceptions go way up when you're trailing in the second half of games, because quarterbacks feel pressure. They feel like they have to force balls that they otherwise may not throw. And you don't want, I think the biggest thing is you want to avoid putting the weight of the world on the shoulders of a rookie quarterback. So, the Jets could draft a quarterback maybe in round 2 or something. I don't feel as much pressure though in that situation, because I don't think the Jets are going to face the same level of pressure to put him in immediately that you would with a quarterback who was drafted 2nd overall. If you drafted a quarterback 2nd overall, you always say, "Oh, we're not putting him in," or almost all the time. I mean, I guess Zach Wilson, the Jets made him the day 1 starter, but most of the time when you draft a quarterback 2nd overall, you'll hear a team say, "Oh, our plan is to sit him the whole year," but it never works out that way unless there's like an established starter, a guy who's been a starter for a long time on your team. But I think with this, even if you draft a quarterback day 2, day 3, there's going to be less pressure to put him in. So you won't feel as obligated to put him into a bad situation. So I think this gives the Jets an opportunity to kind of focus on their defense in a way that may not have been able to if they, if they draft a quarterback 2nd overall. Next question is from Drew. Hi, John. The team is a complete disaster. Other than Garrett Wilson, do we have any other players that are above average? With no obvious quarterback to take in round 1, should we just select the best player available? I feel that anyone we take will be an upgrade. I know positional value is discussed in early rounds, but I'd rather have a sure thing than hope for a guy with a high ceiling pans out. I have no confidence in this coaching staff developing anyone. Well, Drew, I mean, I think that one of the good things, I don't know if you'd call it good, but like one of the aspects of the situation the Jets are in is almost anybody they draft will address a need, because there are like no positions where the Jets don't have a need. Yeah, maybe tackle, but even if you wanted to draft it, you could draft a tackle and move him to guard. That could be your solution at left guard. I mean, that's one of the things I've kind of been floating with Francis Mauigoa, who's the brother of Kiko Mauigoa, a guy the Jets drafted on day 3 last year. So you can reunite the brothers like you did with the Williams brothers for years. I think there's a lot that goes into it. I wouldn't just say immediately draft the best player available. I mean, even though I'm okay, even though you could talk me into drafting a guard at 2, I think running back, safety, those are 2 spots where I would really struggle for the Jets to pick a guy second overall, because I just think that those are positions that on their own don't change the game typically. I may change my mind as we get closer to the draft itself. There's a long way to go in this process. So, I may, and I've already changed my mind a couple of times on what the Jets should do. I think that you always have to balance the two. I think you have to balance positional value versus best player available. I'll say this though, if there ever was a draft class where you would be inclined to throw positional value out, this might be the one, because I don't know that there's like a Penei Sewell in this class. I don't know that there's a Jamar Chase. David Bailey might be the guy. He might be the guy at the premium position who has the chance to be a superstar level player. But this might be the year, because the overall class is so weak that you might consider it. My gut is that you still have to consider positional value, but my mind may change on that the closer we get to draft. I'll get back to you on that one. Feel free to ask that question again in the mailbag when we get closer to the draft. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.